So imagine it's 1943. We are right in the thick of World War II.
Right.
And the United States government actually steps in to halt the release of a massive Hollywood movie, like a major motion picture.
It's a huge one.
And the movie is about a singing desert superhero.
Which just sounds like a punchline today, honestly.
I mean, it really does. The Office of War Information was genuinely terrified that this flamboyant musical, which was based on a totally fluffy 1920s Broadway hit, could somehow fracture the Allied alliance with France.
Oh, yeah, like cause a literal international diplomatic crisis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How on earth does a show that's famous for sweeping waltzes and romance become a matter of national security?
It's honestly one of the strangest collisions of pop culture and geopolitics in American history.
Totally.
And it all stems from a piece of art that most people today might just assume is, a dusty old-fashioned relic. But the reality is just far more complex.
It always is.
Welcome to the Common Room from Chesterton Radio, everyone. Go ahead and pull up a chair. We have an incredible journey ahead of us today.
We really do. I mean, we just finished listening to the Railroad Hour production of the Desert Song, which was broadcast right here on the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas.
Just a magical broadcast.
It really is. Hearing that full symphony orchestra crackle through the speakers, it just completely changes the atmosphere of the room.
Oh, absolutely.
So our mission in this deep dive is to explore the absolute phenomenon that is the Desert Song by Sigmund Romberg, Otto Harbach, and Oscar Hammerstein II.
A legendary trio.
Right. We want to figure out how this unapologetically swashbuckling tale of, disguised heroes and shifting sands basically held a vice grip on American audiences for decades.
Yeah, to map out that journey from the 1926 Broadway premiere to the golden age of radio, and then through 3 distinct Hollywood adaptations, we've pulled together a really comprehensive stack of sources.
A huge stack.
Yeah, we are going to be working through historical analyses of American operettas in the 1920s, some fascinating essays on the cinematic transposition of the American frontier myth onto the Middle East.
Which is such a cool concept.
It really is. Plus, we've got original 1929 press releases from the Warner Brothers archives, and of course the audio transcript of the late 1940s Railroad Hour broadcast we just heard.
And look, if you're listening to this today, you might hear the word operetta and immediately picture, like, stiff, boring, high society theater with powdered wigs.
Right, the monocle crowd.
Exactly.
Okay.
But you have to completely set that aside. What we are talking about today was basically the 1920s equivalent of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
100%.
It was blockbuster, high-budget, action-packed escapism. So let's start right where we just were with the radio broadcast. The sheer scale of the Railroad Hour is something that's just, it's hard to wrap your head around today.
It really was a singular era of broadcasting. I mean, the Railroad Hour was this massive weekly radio series sponsored by the Association of American Railroads.
Which is a whole thing in itself.
It ran from the late 1940s into the 1950s, and their central concept was to take these epic, sprawling stage musicals and operettas, which usually ran for 2.5 hours, and just ruthlessly condense them.
Right, down to 30 or 45-minute radio plays.
Exactly.
Which, I mean, that sounds a bit like modern podcast recaps, right? Or those app-based book summaries. You get the spine of the story and the highlight reel of the songs.
Yeah, the greatest hits.
But the defining difference is just the pure luxury of the delivery. They didn't just have someone reading a dry summary. They employed a full symphony orchestra and top-tier Hollywood and Broadway talent.
It was accessible, high art, beamed directly into your living room for absolutely free.
Which is wild.
And the talent roster for the specific broadcast we just heard is a perfect example of that prestige. You have Gordon MacRae, who was a massive star of the era.
Oh, huge star.
Right, and he is acting as both the host of the program and the dashing leading man, the Red Shadow. And singing opposite him in the role of Margot Bonvolet was Nadine Connor.
And we should point out, Nadine Connor wasn't just some pop singer, right?
No, not at all.
She was a highly celebrated soprano from the Metropolitan Opera.
Precisely. They were bringing genuine operatic firepower to a mass audience.
It wasn't watered down vocally.
Not even a little. Then you fill out the cast with recognizable character actors, like you have Sterling Holloway.
Who I just love.
Right. And most of us today recognize him instantly as the voice of Disney's Winnie the Pooh.
Yes. When he started talking, I was like, wait, is that Pooh Bear in Morocco?
Exactly. He's playing the comic relief, Benny. And Clark Dennis is singing the role of Sid. You even have the silent film legend Francis X. Bushman playing General Birabeau.
The star power is just staggering.
And behind the scenes, you have Carmen Dragon arranging and conducting that incredibly lush orchestral sound, with Norman Luboff directing the choir.
Okay, so the production value is insane. But I have to ask about the corporate motivation here.
Yeah, the railroads.
Right. Why did the Association of American Railroads look at a 1920s story about a French guy running around the Moroccan desert in a cape and think, yes, this perfectly represents the American freight industry?
I mean, it does seem like a stretch at first glance.
A huge stretch.
But it comes down to projecting an image of scale, reliability, and classical American grandeur.
Okay.
If you look at the broadcast transcript, right after a soaring romantic climax, the announcer, Marvin Miller, steps in and pivots just flawlessly to talking about industry.
The ultimate segue.
Right. He mentions that the railroads hauled the major part of the output of America's farms and factories in 1948, spending $1.25 billion on improvements.
$1 billion in 1948 is serious money.
It is. So the strategy was assertive. By bringing the listener the sheer majesty of a symphonic operetta, they were subtly linking that emotional majesty to the physical majesty of the American railroad system.
Okay, wow. That actually makes sense from a 1950s marketing perspective. You want people to think of your trains as epic and romantic. But for the listener to actually tune in week after week, the music has to be the hook. I mean, nobody is tuning in for the freight statistics.
No, definitely not.
And Sigmund Romberg's music for the Desert Song is just relentless in its appeal. Let's break down the mechanics of why these songs actually work so well on the radio.
Well, Romberg was a master of contrast, which is essential when you are trying to keep a radio audience engaged without any visual spectacle.
Right. They can't see the sand dunes or the Cape.
Exactly. So consider the Riff Song. It is this driving, highly masculine march. Musically, it utilizes a heavy percussive rhythm that mimics the sound of a marching army or galloping horses.
Oh, that makes sense.
Just propels the narrative forward with this aggressive momentum.
It totally does. But then he pivots almost instantly to something like One Alone, which is the Red Shadow's signature ballad.
A gorgeous song.
And it is so yearning and sincere. It features these long, sustained melodic lines that allow the singer, in this case Gordon MacRae, to really show off his vocal control and his emotional depth.
And then you have the title track, the Desert Song, which is this sweeping waltz.
Ah, yes.
The lyrics, blue heaven and you and I and sand kissing a moonlit sky, it's just pure atmospheric romance.
Very evocative.
Right. Romberg understood that a waltz inherently makes the listener feel a sense of swirling physical movement. He's using the musical structure to physically transport you right out of your living room.
And we really can't forget Margot's big number, Romance, which is basically a vocal obstacle course.
That's a great way to put it.
It's totally designed to let a soprano like Nadine Connor show everyone exactly why she works at the Met.
Yes.
But to really understand why this music had such incredible staying power, like why people were still desperate to hear it on the radio in the 1950s, we have to look at the world it was born into.
We do.
We need to jump back to the Roaring Twenties, back to 1926.
November 30th, 1926, to be exact. That is when the Desert Song premiered at the Casino Theater on Broadway.
And it wasn't just a modest hit, right?
Oh, it was a monumental success. It ran for 471 performances, which, in the crowded theatrical landscape of the 1920s, was an absolute blockbuster.
Wow.
The highly influential critic Walter Winchell reviewed it and called it a tuneful, gay, and lavishly upholstered entertainment.
Okay, I am obsessed with the phrase lavishly upholstered.
It's so descriptive.
It tells you so much about what theater was at the time. It implies comfort, luxury, and a kind of plush escapism. You're buying a ticket to be swaddled in beautiful sounds and sights.
It perfectly captures the ethos of the era. And the creative team responsible for this upholstery was essentially a supergroup of early American musical theater.
Like the Avengers of Broadway.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
You have Otto Harbach and Frank Mandel writing the book and lyrics, alongside a very young Oscar Hammerstein II.
Which is wild to think about.
It is a crucial moment for Hammerstein. He is working on this just a year before he would completely upend the theatrical world with Showboat.
But the real architect of this specific sound is the composer, Sigmund Romberg. And the sources point out that his personal history is really the key to decoding why the Desert Song sounds the way it does.
Yes, very much so.
He wasn't born in New York, right?
Yeah.
He brought a very specific musical DNA over with him.
Exactly. Romberg was born in Hungary, spent his youth in what is now Croatia, and went to Vienna to study civil engineering, actually.
Civil engineering. From that to Broadway.
Right. But he was utterly captivated by the music of Vienna. So he immigrated to New York City in 1909 and took whatever work he could find, which meant playing piano in various restaurants while people ate dinner.
Which is such a wild visual. The guy who is about to define the sound of Broadway in the 20s is just playing background music for diners in Manhattan.
It is the ultimate immigrant story. But those restaurant gigs were crucial. They allowed him to observe exactly what melodies made American audiences react.
Real-time market research.
Exactly. Eventually, he was hired by the powerful Schubert brothers as a staff composer. Their initial strategy was to have him take popular Central European operettas and adapt them for American ears.
Okay.
And this is where Romberg developed his secret weapon. He learned how to bridge two entirely different musical worlds.
Okay, let's unpack this for a listener who might not be a music theory expert, because you're throwing around terms like Central European operetta.
Sorry.
No, it's good. But what does that actually mean in practice? Like, how does that sound different from what was happening in America at the time?
So in Europe at this time, the dominant theatrical form was the Ruritanian operetta. The most famous example is probably Franz Lehár's The Merry Widow.
Oh, sure.
The formula was very specific. You set the story in a fictional, nostalgic European kingdom, or Ruritania, fill the plot with royalty mingling with commoners, and musically, you rely heavily on the waltz.
So very formal, very grand.
Yes, it was lush, sentimental, and deeply nostalgic for a pre-modern world. The sources refer to this as the Middle Europäer style.
It's basically the musical equivalent of a glittering ballroom in a palace.
That is a perfect description. Now, compare that to what was happening in America in the 1910s and 20s. American popular music was being driven by Tin Pan Alley in New York.
Which was completely different energy.
Completely. This music was faster, more aggressive, and heavily reliant on syncopation.
And syncopation, just to clarify for everyone listening, is when you place the musical emphasis or the accent on the offbeat, right? The beat you aren't expecting.
Yes, exactly.
It creates a sense of surprise and forward momentum, which is the foundational building block of jazz and ragtime.
That's spot on. So European music was sweeping and cyclical like a waltz. American music was driving, jagged, and syncopated.
And Romberg's genius was that he figured out how to combine them.
Right. Our sources describe his work as the perfect balance of operatic schmaltz and syncopated song.
I read a metaphor in the research that I think explains this perfectly. Romberg's music was basically a Trojan horse.
Ooh, I like that. How so?
Well, the sweeping European-style orchestration, the violins, the soaring vocals, that was the wooden horse. It made the traditional theatergoers feel safe and gave them the romantic grandeur they expected.
Right.
But hidden inside that horse were the structural mechanics of Tin Pan Alley. Faster pacing, catchier hooks, and driving American rhythms. He basically modernized the operetta without the audience even realizing it.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
And this fusion was a really critical evolutionary step.
Because things were pretty disjointed before him.
Very. Before Romberg, American musical theater was heavily fractured. You had imported European operettas that felt increasingly old-fashioned, or you had American vaudeville and musical comedy, which were super energetic, but often just a disjointed series of gags and songs with no real narrative cohesion.
Just people doing bits and singing random tunes.
Exactly. Romberg, along with his contemporary Rudolf Fremmel, started pushing toward a more integrated approach. They wanted the music to actually serve the dramatic action of the story.
Which completely lays the runway for Oscar Hammerstein.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't get to the intense psychological storytelling of a show like Oklahoma in 1943 without Romberg first proving that a massive, sweeping narrative could be held together by a unified musical score.
Precisely. But here's where the history of the Desert Song takes a sharp, almost surreal turn.
Yeah, this is the crazy part.
The musical structure was this brilliant, carefully engineered bridge between Vienna and New York. The plot, however, was ripped directly from contemporary, bloody international headlines.
Right. I mean, if you just listen to the songs, you'd think this was a completely made-up fairy tale about a dashing hero in the
A
sand.
total fantasy.
But the inciting incident for this Broadway confection was a very real, very brutal conflict. The 1925 uprising of the Riffs in Morocco.
Yes. The Riffian people are an indigenous Berber population in North Africa. And in the early 1920s, a leader named Abd el-Krim organized a massive armed resistance against the colonial rule of Spain and France.
And this wasn't just a minor skirmish, right?
No, it was a highly organized, heavily publicized anti-colonial war. Abd el-Krim utilized brilliant guerrilla tactics, and the conflict really captured the attention of the global press.
Because it was a huge David and Goliath story.
Exactly. An American journalist named Vincent Sheehan wrote extensive, gripping reports on the rebellion.
And Sigmund Romberg reads these reports about a brutal, modern anti-colonial war involving heavy casualties and guerrilla warfare. And his first thought is, you know what this needs? A soaring soprano solo.
It is a leap, to say the least.
I have to push back here. Did anyone at the time point out how wildly inappropriate it was to turn an ongoing bloody conflict into a tap-dancing Broadway fantasy?
Well, to a modern sensibility, it seems deeply jarring. But we have to understand how Broadway operated in 1926.
Okay, how did they operate?
The theater industry was just a voracious machine looking for raw material. They saw the headlines not as political realities, but as free marketing. The conflict was in the public consciousness, so they co-opted the aesthetic of it. The Moroccan setting, the name riffs, the concept of a rebellion against the French, and completely sanitized the politics.
So they basically kept the wardrobe and dumped the history.
They stripped away the bloodshed and replaced it with a glamorous playground.
They didn't just sanitize the politics, though. They completely altered the physical geography.
Fucking mountains, yes.
The sources highlight a hilarious detail. The actual Riff Mountains, where Abd el-Krim was fighting his guerrilla war, are located in northern Morocco. They are mountainous and rugged, hundreds of miles away from the shifting, cinematic sand dunes of the Sahara Desert.
Right. Completely different terrain. But the creators made a very conscious decision to call the show the Desert Song, not the Mountain Song.
Why?
Because they understood their audience. They knew that a mountain setting sounded cold and gritty. But a desert setting, evoking images of camels, vast moonlit sand dunes, and mysterious veiled figures that triggered the exact kind of exotic, escapist fantasy that would sell tickets.
So historical facts were entirely secondary to theatrical flavor.
Completely secondary.
Which forces us to ask, how did the average American in the 1920s actually view the Middle East and North Africa? Because they clearly weren't looking at it through a lens of strict geopolitical accuracy.
Not at all. And the historical analysis in our sources is fascinating on this exact point. Americans in the 1920s generally did not view these Arab and Berber struggles as legitimate political movements for independence.
Why not?
Because to acknowledge them as legitimate political actors fighting for self-determination would have been incredibly uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable how?
It would have forced Americans to look in the mirror and subtly challenge their own paternalistic self-image, particularly regarding their history of westward expansion and their treatment of Native Americans.
Oh, I see.
It is much easier to digest international news if you filter it through a specific cultural lens.
And the sources call that lens the European romanticist screen.
Right. This is a philosophical framing that dates back to the early 19th century, to figures like Lord Byron or the painter Eugene Delacroix.
Okay, the Romantic era.
The Romantic movement reacted against the strict logic of the Industrial Revolution by vaunting primitive spontaneity over civilized restraint.
So they romanticized the idea of being uncivilized.
Exactly. When they looked at the Middle East and North Africa, they didn't see a modern, politically complex region. They imagined a timeless, exotic realm that existed completely outside of history and modern morality.
Like a fantasy novel.
Yes. They viewed the inhabitants as noble savages living by ancient, impenetrable codes.
I want to highlight an analogy from the sources that just blew my mind because it makes the psychology of the 1920s audience make total sense.
The frontier myth.
Yes. The American popular image of the Middle East was essentially a direct transposition of the American frontier myth. We just swapped out the wardrobe and the scenery.
Explain how that mapped out for the audience.
Okay, so think about the mythology of the Wild West. You have the Great Plains, Native American tribes, and rugged cowboys who operate outside the stifling rules of East Coast society.
Right, the classic Western.
In the American mind, the Middle East became the exact same narrative playground. Instead of the Great Plains, you have shifting desert sands. Instead of the U.S. cavalry, you have the French Foreign Legion.
Oh, wow.
And instead of Native Americans, you have desert nomads. The psychological appeal is identical. It's a vast, untamed wilderness where a rugged individual can find freedom and adventure away from the confines of strict civilization. You are literally just projecting Daniel Boone or the Virginian onto the Sahara.
That is the crucial mechanism. It really explains how an American audience could read a gritty newspaper dispatch about Abdel Krim in the morning and then go to the theater in the evening and happily accept a Hollywood-style chic bursting into song.
Because it already fit their internal narrative.
They neatly fitted these real-world developments into well-worn intellectual niches that required absolutely zero re-examination of their own worldview.
Which brings us perfectly to the hero of our story, who is the ultimate embodiment of this blended, contradictory fantasy. We need to talk about the Red Shadow.
Ah, yes. The Red Shadow is the central pivot of the entire operetta.
And he is quite a character.
The narrative revolves around Pierre Mirabeau, who is the son of the French governor of a Moroccan province.
Yeah.
But Pierre is living a massive double life.
Right.
By day, he pretends to be an absolute milksop, like a weak-witted, subservient, physical coward.
In the radio broadcast we listened to, his cover story is genuinely hilarious. While the French army is preparing for war, Pierre claims he just wants to spend his time picking wildflowers.
Yes, he leans into it hard.
He aggressively plays the fool to convince everyone, especially his father, that he is utterly harmless.
But by night, he dons a scarlet burnous and a mask and transforms into the fierce Red Shadow, the mysterious and terrifying leader of the native Riff tribes.
Which means he is actively leading a rebellion against his own father's French forces.
Exactly. And this dual identity is the engine that drives the central romance.
Enter Margot Bonvalet.
She is a lively, sassy French girl who has been brought to the garrison and is engaged to a very stiff, terribly proper French captain named Fontaine.
The classic boring fiancé trope.
Right. But Margot is deeply unsatisfied. She is bored by civilized European manners. She explicitly sings about wanting romance, danger, and adventure.
She basically announces to the audience that she wouldn't mind being swept away by a daring desert chic.
And Pierre, in his guise as the Red Shadow, is more than happy to oblige. He dramatically abducts her, whisking her away on horseback to the remote desert palace of a wealthy Riff ally, Ali Ben Ali.
But here is the brilliant, manipulative twist of the trope.
Oh, yes.
Once he gets her there, he doesn't act like a brutal warlord. He woos her with complete Western consideration, gentleness, and respect.
And of course, Margot falls deeply in love with this masked outlaw, completely oblivious to the fact that the man singing her these gorgeous waltzes is actually Pierre, the flower-picking fool whom she actively despises back at the garrison.
It is the ultimate romantic fantasy cheat code.
It really is.
You get the visceral thrill and danger of being abducted by a fierce warrior, but once you arrive, you discover he is actually a total gentleman who respects your boundaries and sings perfectly on pitch.
It's having your cake and eating it too.
Exactly. But a double life can only last so long, and the climax of the show brings it all crashing down.
The climax hinges on a moment of impossible dramatic tension. General Mirabeau, Pierre's father, tracks the rebels to the desert palace.
Oh, boy.
And he confronts the Red Shadow and challenges him to a duel to secure Margot's freedom.
Now, Pierre is trapped. He is a rebel leader, but he is still a son. He obviously cannot draw his sword and kill his own father, so he refuses to fight.
Which, to his Riffian followers, who do not know the Red Shadow's true identity, looks like an act of cowardly surrender.
Right, a leader who will not fight is no leader at all.
It's a genuinely gripping sequence. In the radio broadcast, you hear the howling wind of the desert, and the choir sings this incredibly solemn, mournful farewell.
You give me chills, honestly.
The Riffs strip him of his command, break his sword, and banish him alone into the unforgiving desert to die.
It strips the hero of his power completely. But because this is an operetta, Pierre is highly resourceful.
Naturally.
He survives the desert and makes his way back to the French headquarters. He arrives carrying the Red Shadow's mask and his own broken sword, and he spins a spectacular lie.
A huge lie.
He claims that he, Pierre the Milksop, ventured into the desert, hunted down, and killed the infamous rebel leader.
It is such a clever narrative trick. By killing his alter ego, he permanently destroys the Red Shadow, thereby saving his own life from a French firing squad.
It's so neat.
He simultaneously wins the deep respect of his father and finally proves his bravery to Margot, allowing them to be together. It is a remarkably tidy resolution.
It is. Now, if we unpack the cultural lineage of this character, it reveals a lot about our enduring pop culture appetites.
It does.
Because the Red Shadow wasn't created in a vacuum. The sources note that Romberg and his librettists were heavily leveraging the T.E. Lawrence mystique.
Lawrence of Arabia.
Exactly. Thomas Edward Lawrence was a massive global figure in the 1920s. a white European protagonist who immersed himself in Arab culture and successfully led indigenous fighters in a revolt against the Ottoman Empire.
The Red Shadow is effectively a French, highly romanticized, singing version of T.E. Lawrence.
And beyond the historical parallel, the character taps into the deepest, most enduring trope in modern fiction, which is the disguised hero.
Oh, absolutely.
The operetta draws a direct, unbroken line from the Scarlet Pimpernel, the British aristocrat who acted like an annoying fop by day but rescued French nobles from the guillotine by night,
Right.
straight through to Zorro, the Red Shadow, and eventually Superman.
The parallel to Superman is uncanny.
It really is. I mean, Pierre is Clark Kent, and the Red Shadow is Superman, a full decade before comic books even existed.
And Margot is essentially Lois Lane. She is desperately in love with Superman, but constantly dismisses and belittles Clark Kent.
Yes. Which forces us to ask, why does this specific mechanism, the hidden identity, resonate so deeply and consistently with audiences across different generations and mediums?
Well, what do you think?
I think it plays on a universal human fantasy of unrecognized potential. Almost everyone at some point in their life feels overlooked or underestimated by society or by a boss or by someone they have a crush on.
Sure.
The disguised hero trope validates the fantasy that underneath our mild-mannered, ordinary exterior, there is a powerful, dynamic hero just waiting to be unleashed, if only the world knew our secret.
That is a very astute psychological read. And it was an intoxicating mix of elements for the 1920s audience.
Perfect storm.
You have the hidden identity, the sweeping romance, the exotic, if wildly inaccurate setting, and Romberg's undeniably gorgeous melodies. It was a formula that proved to be an absolute goldmine.
It really was.
In fact, it was far too big and too lucrative to be contained to just the Broadway stage or the radio. Hollywood quickly realized what they had, and they adapted the Desert Song into 3 major motion pictures over 3 decades.
And this is where the deep dive gets incredibly revealing. Because if you track those 3 films, released in 1929, 1943, and 1953, you get a perfect time-lapse of how American culture, morality, and geopolitical anxiety were shifting.
It's a mirror to society.
The underlying intellectual property remained the same, but the studios radically molded the narrative to fit the neuroses of the specific decade.
Right.
Let's walk through them, starting with the 1929 Warner Brothers film.
The 1929 version, starring John Bowles as the Red Shadow and Myrna Loy, is a massive technological milestone. It was billed as the very first all-singing, all-talking operetta captured on film.
Utilizing the brand new Vitaphone sound-on-disc technology, right?
Exactly.
So it was a pioneer. But narratively, how did it compare to the stage version?
Narratively, it was highly faithful to the Broadway original. It retained the Moroccan setting, the plot, and most importantly, the edge of the 1926 stage production.
But that faithfulness actually became its undoing a few years later, didn't it?
It did.
Why did this groundbreaking movie essentially get locked in a vault?
It comes down to the implementation of the Hays Code. The 1929 film was made during what is known as the pre-code era of Hollywood.
Let's define that for our listeners. What exactly does pre-code mean in terms of what a director could actually show on screen?
Well, before 1934, Hollywood studios operated without strict, centralized moral censorship. Directors could include sexual innuendo, suggestive humor, women in revealing clothing, and open discussions of adult themes.
So they could get away with a lot more.
A lot more. The 1929 Desert Song contained all the bawdy, slightly naughty elements that were perfectly acceptable for a sophisticated Broadway theater crowd in the Roaring '20s.
But then the rules changed.
In 1934, under pressure from religious and civic groups, Hollywood strictly enforced the production code. Suddenly, all of those elements became totally taboo. You couldn't show a hero acting with moral ambiguity. You couldn't have overtly sexualized dialogue.
And because the 1929 film violated these new puritanical rules, it was heavily suppressed.
It basically disappeared from public view for decades.
Wow. So you have this incredibly valuable musical property, but you literally can't show the movie anymore.
Right.
Fast forward to 1943. Warner Brothers wants to capitalize on the music again, but the world has completely changed. We are deep into World War II, and this is the adaptation that genuinely blew my mind.
It is one of the most radical rewrites in cinematic history.
No kidding.
They decide to film a new version in glorious 3-strip Technicolor, starring Dennis Morgan. But they realize a story about a French aristocrat fighting French colonialism in the 1920s makes absolutely zero sense to a 1943 audience.
Right, it doesn't fit the mood at all.
So they completely gut the plot and turn it into a piece of overt anti-fascist wartime propaganda.
Okay, lay out the new plot because it is wild.
They turn the protagonist into an American. He's now Paul Hudson, a battle-hardened veteran of the Spanish Civil War.
Of course he is.
His alter ego is no longer the Red Shadow. He goes by El Kobar.
Yeah.
And instead of fighting the French, he rallies the Riffs to fight against insidious Nazi agents who are secretly trying to build a strategic railroad in Morocco.
Which is just, I mean, a massive leap.
Oh, and for his daytime cover story, he plays piano in a bustling Moroccan nightclub.
Wait, hold on. A cynical American playing piano in a Moroccan nightclub during World War II while fighting Nazis.
Sound familiar?
They basically just took the script of Casablanca and crammed Sigmund Romberg's music into it.
The parallels to Casablanca, which Warner Brothers had released just the year before, are undeniable. They were clearly recycling a winning formula.
Wow.
But here is where the story gets deeply complicated by real-world geopolitics. You mentioned the censorship in the introduction.
Right.
The United States Office of War Information actually stepped in and held up the release of this film for over a year.
Well, why? If the movie is about an American hero killing Nazis, isn't that exactly the kind of propaganda the government wanted Hollywood to make?
Normally, yes. But the geopolitical situation in North Africa in 1942 and 1943 was incredibly fragile. The film originally contained dialogue hinting that Arabs living under French colonial rule did not have complete freedom and that they desired independence from France.
Ah, I see where this is going.
And in 1943, the Allies had just launched Operation Torch, landing troops in North Africa. We desperately needed the local French colonial forces, some of whom were aligned with Vichy France, some with the Free French, to cooperate with us.
Right, so you can't have a movie trashing the French.
Exactly. The State Department and the Office of War Information were terrified. If Hollywood releases a massive Technicolor film depicting an American hero actively helping Arabs throw off the yoke of French control, it could have deeply offended the French military leaders we were trying to court.
A musical could have literally caused a diplomatic incident that cost American lives.
Precisely. So the government forced Warner Brothers to delay the film and edit around the complexities of French colonialism.
That is just incredible.
Hollywood was trying to use an operetta to fight the Nazis, but the real-world complexities of the Middle East were far too volatile for a simple musical narrative.
It is staggering to think about government agents sitting in a screening room taking notes on a Sigmund Romberg operetta for national security reasons.
It really is.
But eventually, it is released, and despite all the meddling, the 1943 film is a massive box office hit. Audiences still flock to it.
They loved it.
Which brings us to the final cinematic bite at the apple, the 1953 film.
By 1953, the war is long over. The cultural pendulum in America has swung again away from wartime anxiety and toward the more conservative, family-oriented suburban values of the Eisenhower era.
The era of the white picket fence.
Right. Warner Brothers produces yet another Technicolor version. This time it stars Gordon MacRae, the same Gordon MacRae who hosted our radio broadcast, and Kathryn Grayson.
But this time they give it a completely different kind of scrub down, right?
Heavily sanitized.
Yeah.
They retain the name El Kobar from the 1943 version, but they completely strip out all the wartime anti-Nazi context.
Sure.
Furthermore, they radically alter the hero's daytime persona to fit the softer 1950s aesthetic. He's no longer a cowardly milksop, nor is he a cynical, battle-hardened war veteran.
Oh, is he?
He's now a mild-mannered Latin tutor and anthropologist.
A Latin tutor. That is the most unthreatening 1950s profession imaginable.
Excuse me, I must put down my textbook on Roman antiquity so I can go lead a violent desert rebellion. It's so jarring.
It is certainly a choice geared toward making him a palatable, safe leading man. But they didn't stop there.
Oh, no.
They also fundamentally changed the familial relationships of the original story. Remember how in 1926 the climax hinged on the dark, tragic tension of Pierre refusing to duel his own father?
Right, the moment of ultimate sacrifice.
In 1953, the studio decided that was too dark for a family film, so they simply changed the script. General Mirabeau is no longer the hero's father. He is made into Margot's father instead.
Which completely defangs the climax.
It really does.
It removes all the Edel tension, all the moral ambiguity, and smooths out every single rough edge. You are left with a bright, colorful, incredibly safe musical comedy.
But I have to point out the ultimate irony in all of this. Over the course of 30 years, this singular property was a faithful, slightly naughty Broadway romp. Then it was heavily weaponized anti-fascist propaganda, and then it was a squeaky clean suburban family film.
It wore a lot of hats.
The plot was twisted into a pretzel to appease whatever geopolitical crisis or moral panic was dominating the decade. But despite all those massive fundamental rewrites, the one thing that kept bringing audiences back, the reason these movies made millions of dollars, never changed.
And what was that constant?
The sweeping, undeniable melodies of Sigmund Romberg. The studio executives could have put the red shadow in a spaceship fighting Martians, and as long as he paused to sing one alone, the audience was going to buy a ticket.
It really would.
The music was bulletproof. It transcended the ridiculousness of the shifting plots.
That is a profound observation. The music was the actual anchor. And I think that brings us to the ultimate overarching question of our deep dive today. We're sitting here in the common room, looking back at this phenomenon from a modern vantage point. How should we listen to the Desert Song today?
It is the crucial question. Because, let's be honest, there are elements of this piece that we simply cannot ignore.
Yes, we have to acknowledge the colonialist backdrop, the intense exoticism, and the wildly inaccurate, deeply romanticized depiction of North African and Arab culture.
It's very dated.
The historical Rif conflict, led by Abd el-Krim, was a brutal, grinding war for independence that resulted in massive casualties on both sides. Broadway took that trauma and turned it into a fantasy playground where a white European hero swoops in to lead the indigenous population because presumably the writers couldn't fathom them organizing themselves.
Right. The white savior trope is front and center, and we are observing this thoughtfully as historical context. Our goal isn't to deliver a present-day academic lecture or to wag a finger at 1926 audiences, but it is vital to distinguish the actual historical struggle of the Riffian people from the Broadway fantasy. They are two entirely separate entities that just happen to share a name.
That's an important distinction. But once we acknowledge that historical disconnect, we are left with a fascinating paradox about the history of American theater.
What's the paradox?
By the time the Railroad Hour was broadcasting in the late 40s and 50s, musical theater had evolved dramatically. Oscar Hammerstein, the very man who co-wrote the Desert Song, had moved on to pioneer the musical play.
Right, the Golden Age stuff.
He was writing shows like Oklahoma, Carousel, and South Pacific. These new shows were deeply integrated, psychologically complex, and dealt with serious real-world issues like domestic abuse and systemic racism.
They were heavy.
Yet even as the art form grew up and became serious, audiences stubbornly held on to the Desert Song. They kept going to the revivals, watching the movies, and tuning into the radio broadcasts. Why did they hold on?
Because it delivered pure, unadulterated escapism. That is the magic of the piece. As one of our sources points out so beautifully, this operetta created a unique psychological space where the fairy tales of our infancy, the robust adventure stories of our adolescence, and the romantic longings of our adulthood could all mingle together, completely unembarrassed by logic, morality, or the harsh realities of the world.
Unembarrassed by logic is a perfect, almost poetic description of the genre.
Exactly. You didn't buy a ticket to the Desert Song to learn about geopolitical strife in Morocco or to confront the darkness of the human condition.
Oh, definitely not.
You went to be completely transported. You went to hear a beautiful melody that made you forget for 2 hours that the world outside was complicated and scary.
And that leads to a necessary speculation about what we might have lost as musical theater evolved.
What do you mean?
Modern theater is undoubtedly more sophisticated.
Yeah.
It is dramatically sound, structurally brilliant, and far more socially conscious than the operettas of the 1920s. But in our rush to make theater important, is there a missing space in our culture for this kind of unapologetically beautiful, unabashedly romantic storytelling?
I firmly believe there is. There is a unique transporting power in a piece of art that doesn't try to teach you a lesson, doesn't try to deconstruct society, but simply exists to deliver sweeping waltzes, daring sword fights, and pure, earnest romance.
It's a valid form of art.
Sometimes at the end of a long week, you don't want a heavy drama. You just want to hear a tenor hit a spectacular high note while wearing a cape in the moonlight.
It is the sheer unapologetic emotional indulgence of it. The willingness of the audience to just surrender to the melody without overthinking it.
Exactly. All right, let's take a breath and quickly recap the massive globe-spanning journey we have taken today.
It's been quite a ride.
We started with the grim reality of a 1925 anti-colonial uprising in the rugged Moroccan mountains. We saw how that gritty journalism was instantly spun by Romberg, Harbach, and Hammerstein into a lavish, highly romanticized Broadway sensation in 1926.
Driven by a musical score that perfectly bridged European nostalgia and American momentum.
From there, we tracked how it proved to be an incredibly flexible intellectual property, adapted by Hollywood into a censored pre-code romance, a geopolitically dangerous World War II propaganda piece, and finally, a sanitized 1950s family film.
And ultimately, it found its way onto the radio airwaves, delivering those enduring Romberg melodies straight into millions of American living rooms via the Railroad Hour.
Which is exactly where our journey in the common room began today.
It stands as a remarkable testament to the enduring power of melody. A great song can outlast the specific, sometimes problematic context of its creation.
It really can. But before we sign off and let you go, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
Our sources note that by 1959, the total hard-on-its-sleeve earnestness of shows like The Desert Song was already being openly parodied.
Right, the spoof era.
There was a famous off-Broadway musical spoof called Little Mary Sunshine that relentlessly mocked the tropes of the Red Shadow and heroic singing Mounties, and that was happening in the late 50s. Now think about our current cultural landscape today.
It is a landscape defined by irony.
Completely. Almost all of our modern blockbuster entertainment is draped in layers of irony, self-awareness, and cynical deconstruction.
Yeah, nobody wants to be caught being sincere.
Exactly. If a character does something heroic or romantic, there usually has to be a quip right afterward to undercut it. We are culturally terrified of being perceived as cheesy or uncool.
We constantly feel the need to wink at the audience, to prove we are in on the joke, to prove we know it is all just a movie.
Exactly. We have built this impenetrable armor of irony. So here's my question to you, the listener. In a world utterly exhausted by cynicism and meta-commentary, are we secretly starved for a piece of media that just earnestly, unapologetically tries to sweep us off our feet?
That's a great question.
If something like The Desert Song, with its total lack of cynicism and absolute unblinking commitment to romance, premiered today completely hard on its sleeve, would we even know how to receive it?
Or have we lost the capacity to just surrender to the waltz?
That is exactly it.
That is a wonderful, challenging question to leave hanging in the air of the common room.
Thank you so much for pulling up a chair and joining us today on Chesterton Radio. It has been an absolute pleasure diving into this history with you.
A real pleasure.
Until next time, we invite you to go seek out the soaring melodies of The Desert Song for yourself. Find a recording, turn it up, and see if that waltz doesn't just carry you away.